Good afternoon and welcome to this edition of Live from NOIRLab at Arizona. I'm your host, Rob Sparks, with our moderator, Jamika Marshall. Hi, Jamika. Our guest today is Casey Good, Public Program Specialist and Astrophotography Instructor at Kitt Peak Visitor Center. Casey's going to talk about an exciting new program, Remote Astrophotography Opportunities at Kitt Peak Visitor Center, which I'm excited to hear about because I love astrophotography myself. Remember, if you have any questions, enter them in the chat box in Facebook or YouTube, and Jamika and I will relay them to our guest. But first, before we actually begin, let's get this slide advanced here. There we go. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about Kitt Peak National Observatory, for those of you who are not familiar with it. Kitt Peak is funded by the National Science Foundation and is a NOIRLab facility. It was founded in 1958 and located about 55 miles southwest of Tucson on land leased with the Tohono-O'odham Nation. We are indebted to them for letting us use one of their sacred mountains for astronomical research. Kitt Peak is home to over 24 optical telescopes and 2 radio telescopes, so lots of different research goes on there. Now, every month I like to do a quick highlight of something that happened at Kitt Peak recently, and recently we had a wonderful NOIRLab stories. I believe Jamika will actually drop the link in the chat for you to get more information about this on NEID, a new hunter of potentially habitable planets on Kitt Peak. The NEID instrument, fitted to the 3.5-meter WIN telescope at Kitt Peak National Observatory and operated by a consortium of institutions, including NOIRLab, is promising to make great strides in the ongoing quest to find other habitable planets around a star other than our Sun. Space missions such as NASA's Kepler Space Telescope and the Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite, also known as TESS, discover planets by watching them pass in front of their stars and block a small percentage of that star's light. So you literally see the star get a little bit dimmer as the planet passes in front of it. The amount of light blocked depends on the size of the planet, its diameter, and that can tell us the diameter of the planets, but they cannot tell us a planet's mass, or how much stuff is the planet's made of. Knowing the mass of a planet is crucial because once the mass and diameter are known, you can calculate the density of the planet and determine whether it's made of liquids, liquid ice, gas, solid rock, etc. So we start to learn about the composition of the planets at that point. That's why instruments such as NEID, which is NOIRLab's new planet hunter installed on the 3.5-meter telescope, are needed. Pronounced NEID, it is named after the Tohono-O'odham word to see. NEID sees stars wobbling by measuring the radial velocity of a star's light. That is the Doppler shift of the star's light as it wobbles toward us and away from us, due to the gravitational influence of the planet that's orbiting it. NEID is designed to nominally detect radial velocities as low as 1 kilometer per hour. During testing, NEID reached even greater precision, slightly better than this, as researchers fine-tuned the instrument and tried to get ever closer to the 0.4 kilometer per hour goal. That's a very, very slow-moving planet for measured a very long distance. However, there's one problem that must first be overcome if that accuracy is to be achieved. While the ultimate goal is to be able to detect an Earth-like planet around a Sun-like star, we aren't there yet, says Sarah Logston, who is an assistant scientist at NEID at NOIRLab in Tucson. That's because the activity on stars, which causes their brightness to fluctuate, and huge clouds of plasma to be ejected in coronal mass ejections, can create a radio velocity signal that swamps that of a small planet. To distinguish the signal of such a world, the stellar activity must be corrected for. And this brings me to one of my favorite things on Kitt Peak. We have this big 3.5-meter WIN telescope, but attached to the building is the smallest telescope on Kitt Peak. This NEID Solar Telescope is just an off-the-shelf 75-millimeter aperture instrument funded by the Heising-Simmons Foundation and perched atop the roof of the WIN building at Kitt Peak. Optical fibers feed the view through the NEID spectrograph, allowing astronomers to calculate the baseline of activity, which can then be applied to other Sun-like stars. Subtracting the stellar baseline from the radial velocity measurements should leave just the signal of the planets, allowing us to get even more precise measurements. So I love that this is the smallest telescope on Kitt Peak that's actually actively doing research right now and observes the sun almost every clear day. And believe it or not, the data is publicly available online too. So you can go to our website and find the data from this telescope online. If you want to have more information about this exciting project, Jamika put the link in the chat for you, so you can go to it and read the entire story. Now let's get on to our program. I'd like to welcome our guest, Casey Good, who has been teaching Kitt Peak's astrophotography classes since 2016, where he developed courses based on the needs of today's hobbyist, having started out as one in his backyard. Casey's been recognized internationally for his work, having been awarded over 20 Astronomy Pictures of the Day awards from NASA, Amateur APOD, astrobin.com, published in other outlets. In 2019, he was recognized as one of Insight's Astrophotographers of the Year, having 2 awarded images on display at the Royal Greenwich Museum in London. In real life, Casey is the Chief Financial Officer of a hospital system in Tucson. Welcome, Casey.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks for
Yeah,
having me on the program today. I'm excited to talk to you guys about Kitt Visitor Center's new offerings that we have.
yes, and I'm excited to learn about them and hopefully participate them at some point in the near future. So I've stopped sharing, so please take it away, Casey.
All right, we'd love to host you anytime, Rob. Just let us know. All righty. So like Robert had said, the Kitt Visitor Center now has some remote astrophotography capabilities that were initially developed prior to the pandemic as a modification of the offerings that we had already, our program offerings that we had already had at Kitt Peak, specifically our overnight telescope observing program that was one of our most popular programs on the mountain. We wanted the ability to be using a telescope to remotely collect astrophotographs while guests were on the mountain participating in our program, so we could also use those telescopes to view through. And then obviously the pandemic hit. Now we're almost out of it, but not quite there yet. So we've decided to repurpose that specific telescope and open up new opportunities for individuals who actually can't come to the mountain as well. And during this time of the pandemic, the visitors aren't currently allowed to visit the mountain. So just a quick update on the visitor center operations as they stand today, May 4th. The mountain is still closed to members of the public. However, we hope that'll be changing very, very soon. However, the visitor center operations still continue. We're still there working and still trying to promote astronomy outreach. One of the ways we're doing that is the remote telescope rental via the Solario telescope that I'll be talking about. And we're also conducting astrophotography workshops via Zoom in a format just like this. And also work is still continuing on the Windows on the Universe Center for Astronomy Outreach, which if you haven't heard about it, I believe there is a prior NOIRLab, a live from NOIRLab, where the Visitor Center Manager, Bill Buckingham, came on to talk about that fantastic project that we're working on. It's going to be one of the largest centers for astronomy outreach in the world. And work is continuing on that day by day, and we're hoping it'll be open in the near future to welcome guests. So specifically, I wanted to talk about the Solario telescope. And just to give everyone a little bit of background, it started off with a shed that was right next to the visitor center. And we had a little bit of a dream about what we could do with this. When I first started working at Kitt Peak, this was literally used to house originally vending machines. And it sort of collected some other things from the visitor center, like wheelchairs and other miscellaneous items that we use for public outreach. But, you know, seeing the need to expand our programs, I thought that we could potentially convert this unused shed to a roll-off roof observatory to augment and enhance the programs that we were offering. So a couple of us wrote a proposal to convert this shed into a roll-off roof observatory called Solario with very little funding. We were actually granted some additional funds from NOIRLab back when it used to be NOAO to convert this building into a roll-off roof observatory that had a dual purpose, both for solar and imaging. So that's precisely what Solario stands for. It's our solar observatory during the day, and it's also an imaging observatory at night. It's actually a very, very unique designed roll-off roof observatory. If there's any members of the public that are watching that might have their own in their backyard, typically you just have one single roof that rolls off in one direction to open up to the skies whenever you're ready to bring your telescope out. However, with Solario, we wanted to have the ability to have both our solar array that previously was on the complete opposite side of the mountain. It was something like a half a mile walk across our mountaintop to get to our solar array from the visitor center. So we wanted to have the solar array right next to our visitor center, especially, and make it more accessible to guests that were coming up to Kitt Peak. But we also still wanted to have the ability to use this facility as an imaging observatory, to have a system that would stay put essentially and be able to be accessed by any of our guides doing any of our programs, to be able to demonstrate with a camera what we were actually viewing through the eyepiece as well. It also opened up an array of possibilities, remote imaging obviously being one of them, but it offered us the ability to do public outreach for individuals that couldn't make the trip to Kitt Peak, or perhaps people that were limited by any kind of disability that couldn't drive to our mountaintop, or walk around the top of our mountain at night as part of our popular nighttime program offerings. So it took about 1.5 years to build this facility, and you can see an example of what is there now, where we actually have members that have come up for a daytime tour that get to look at, through our calcium, hydrogen alpha, and white light solar telescopes, look at the activity that's happening on the sun, which right now it's actually been quite active. So it's really fun to look through these different spectrums of light and see what we can see on the surface of the sun, and we can see solar prominences. So that's really fun. And then at night, half of the roof closes and the other half will open. And then we get to use our 12.5-inch telescope for, remote imaging. So as the visitor center is not quite yet open to the public, we have decided to open this program up and allow the public access to this observatory and to this telescope. So you can actually rent the Solario facility for your own remote imaging needs. The instrument itself is a 12.5-inch parallax instruments RC telescope. It's got a focal length of 2,000 millimeters at an f6.3, so it's fairly fast for an imaging telescope. It's got a one-shot color APS-C size sensor on it, and it's riding on a Paramount ME mount. So it's a very accurate tracking mount, and then the image scale that's provided by the specific telescope and the camera is about 0.48 arc seconds per pixel. So it's great for imaging smaller objects, but the sensor real estate, so to speak, is such that you can still get some of the larger nebulas and larger galaxies in there. And I'll show you a couple of images that we've been able to get through there. The system is actually great because we can provide you access, provide you a login to this system. And if you're familiar with imaging, you can use the system, to your heart's desire without any interruption from us, other than, just opening the roof for you and making sure the computer and the telescope's on. So we operate the system with a program called NEID, which stands for Nighttime Imaging and Astronomy. It's a great program. It's also a free to use program. So anybody that practices astrophotography in their backyard probably uses this system, or at least started out on it. And so if you know how to use the system and you don't feel like you need a guide with you, you can have the keys to the observatory for the evening. So for $325, you get the observatory for the entire night. However, if you want to do some remote imaging, but you need some assistance from a guide, you can pay an additional $90 to have a trained staff member from the visitor center with you the entire night via a Zoom, and they can operate the telescope for you. And we've even had some individuals request that the guides kind of provide, similar to what our nighttime programs used to be when members of the public would come up, just a tour of the entire night sky. So you could have a guide take, for example, a 5-minute exposure, and then the image from the telescope would be displayed on the screen, and you guys could talk about what is going on with this particular image. If you're interested in galaxies, you can do a tour of different galaxies and get these 5-minute snapshots of, M31 or M51 or M33, and you'll have a knowledgeable guide to discuss what's going on in the image and astronomically speaking, what's happening with that particular deep sky object. So it's a really cool rental in that you can do kind of what you want with the telescope. It's having your own remote telescope on Kitt Peak to do whatever you want for your imaging needs. So here's just an example of what the interface looks like when you sign in and sign on to the NEID program. You actually can just type in an object, for example, M33, as you guys can see here, and frame it how you would like it within the system. And it will generate a program for you, and you just tell it how many sub exposures you want. So say you want to image this target for 3 hours at 10 minutes a piece. You could just type in, 18 exposures at 600 seconds a piece, and then press the go button. And if you're like me and have other commitments at night, and maybe you want to just go to sleep, the data will be delivered to you first thing in the morning once you get it set up. Or if you want to do individual targets, you can simply go over here into this imaging button and just start typing in targets that you'd like to acquire and have the telescope go and do a quick 5-minute, 3-minute exposure on the individual target, get the data for that one target and move on to the next. So it's really versatile. It's like basically having the same system you would have in your backyard, just up at Kitt Peak where you're accessing it remotely. If you're more of a sophisticated imager, you can actually build out entire sequences to make the most of your night, where let's say there's an object setting in the west, but at 3 o'clock in the morning, there's going to be another one rising that you're interested in. Like this time of year, the Milky Way happens to be rising in the early morning, and you want to get something over there too, but you don't want to stay up all night. You can actually create sequences within this program, and it'll tell you when each object rises and sets and transits, so you can really make the most of your night. And again, if you're not an experienced imager, but you want to get these really beautiful astrophotographs from Kitt Peak, one of our guides can help you. If you just come with a list and tell us the objects that you want, we can set it up for you and press the button for you and deliver the data for you to post-process on your own afterwards. So here's a couple of example images from Solario when we were testing it out. These were taken over the last couple of months, just as we were making sure that the telescope was ready and operational for the public before we turned over the keys to everyone. So here's an image of NGC, I believe this is 2903 in the constellation of Leo, really beautiful barred spiral galaxy. Then obviously, like I said, we can have some larger deep sky image or larger targets that you can image. This is M33. And then, of course, the Running Man, which I also refer to as Gumby. Growing up in the 80s and 90s, I see, the little green Gumby guy in this particular target, but another beautiful image in the constellation of Orion that highlights just the amount of depth that you can get in this image. It's not the brightest target in the night sky. It is a fairly bright target, but this was, I believe, only about an hour and a half worth of exposure. And you really see that dark, faint, twisting dust really start to pop out in the depths of color and blues and reds that are coming out in this image. And then finally, obviously, the horsehead made famous by many astrophotographers. But this, again, I believe was only about an hour and 20 minutes of exposure. So theoretically, all of these images you could get in a single night renting out our telescope. The benefits of being up at Kitt Peak, obviously why all the professional astronomers are there. We're in a very, very dark sky. We have excellent seeing conditions, very, very transparent seeing conditions, and 300 days of clear skies. So chances are, if you reserve the telescope for one of the moonless nights, and you're going to get a really great night of imaging. And if you don't, if clouds come in, we'll reschedule you for the next night or whatever is convenient for you. Any questions so far, guys? Popping up?
No, none so far, but I do have a question.
Sure, go for it.
So as you were saying, if we have interest in astrophotography, we can join the Zoom. You said you have Zoom classes. Is there a charge for the Zoom classes? Is that a part? Is it separate or is it with this?
So it is separate, but we've actually found that this is a great segue going into, if you have an interest in astrophotography like you're talking about, we actually use Solario during our astrophotography workshops. And so you get the data, and then I'm the teacher of that, and I teach you how to actually create these images using a post-processing program called PixInsight, and how to manipulate the data and create these beautiful photographs. So it's kind of like a 1-2 punch, so to speak, where you get the rental, and then you can also sign up for our class and learn how to put the images together if you're not familiar with it.
And where are the classes? Because I've dropped the link to the announcements that we did about Solario in the chat and the technical specs in the chat. But where can we find the registration for the workshop, Casey?
They're going to be on Eventbrite, is the system that we use to both sign up for Solario rentals and the workshop, which I'll get into in just a little bit. But Eventbrite is the platform that we use. If you just search Kitt Peak, it'll show up, but we also have it linked from our visitor center webpage, which is www.visitkittpeak.org.
Fantastic, Casey. I will drop the Eventbrite links in the chat.
All right, thank you. So perfect segue from Jamaica. One of the other remote offerings that we've come up with is an online PixInsight workshop. So typically in the past, we have our workshops on site at Kitt Peak. It's a 3-day workshop. We have 2 different ones that are, one is an intro to astrophotography and another one is an intermediate astrophotography workshop. And so the intro is meant for individuals who've never held a camera, don't own a telescope, just have an interest in astrophotography, saw some great images on Instagram and you want to try it out. You can sign up for the intro and we'll spend 3 days on Kitt Peak, crash course on astrophotography. You'll leave there wanting to, burn a hole in your pocket essentially and get a nice setup. And then our intermediate class is where we really focused on this program called PixInsight. So PixInsight within the hobby of astrophotography has kind of become the de facto processing program for creating images. Once you get the data from the telescope or from your camera, you have to put together an image. Essentially, you have to stack the data, you have to properly calibrate the data. And then after that, you start working on putting together a visually pleasing image from your data. And when I started this hobby, there really wasn't very good resources for this program. Everyone said, oh my gosh, you have to use PixInsight. This is the best program out there. It's meant specifically for us. Photoshop's great, but PixInsight is really meant for astrophotography processing. But being that it was kind of an open source platform, there's not a lot of good documentation on what to do in it. And it can be very, very daunting when you first open it up because there's like 300 different processes that you could potentially do and you have no idea what order to do them in, how the system works, what these crazy names are. Like one of the processes is called morphological transformation. What does that even mean? And so that becomes a challenge for a lot of people that are getting into the hobby. And so that was a portion of our intermediate workshop, and it still will be once we get back on the mountain. But what I've done is distilled that processing piece and created an online full-day workshop focusing on just this program. So it's really intended for astrophotographers that want to make the jump to PixInsight and want to improve their processing skills and learn how to use this program. So being that it's online and we're not offering like an introductory astrophotography course like we have, we assume that you have no prior knowledge with this program. We even assume that you've never processed an image before. So for those that aren't familiar with it, it's a great way to jump into PixInsight if you've been wondering that, maybe you should make the switch. For those that have dabbled in it and still haven't worked a great workflow out for themselves, it's great for those intermediate people as well. I teach a standard workflow that works for like 99% of images. And I really try to teach everyone the why as to what we're doing while we're processing these images and what these different processes and scripts actually do to your image and what's the purpose of it. So as it stands right now, it's a single day experience. It goes from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Arizona time. And we all get together on Zoom like this. We will send some data sets that have been acquired prior to our meeting so we can learn with those. But then at the culmination of the workshop, we'll actually, as a class, decide how we want to use Solario that night. And so we'll get together online and set up an imaging run to get fresh data from Kitt Peak that will then be sent to you guys afterwards to practice on your own at home. So like I said, this is what a typical workflow in PixInsight looks like. Kind of crazy, very, very confusing. And so I've distilled it down to basically like a 15-step program on how to take your basic raw data and get a nice finished image. And once we've gone through how to do that and you get the process done, it takes you about 20 to 30 minutes to put together a beautiful, beautiful image. So like I mentioned, you will use our custom process icons as a roadmap for most data sets. We will pre-process, so that means taking your light frames and then calibrating them with darks, lights, and bias frames. Both one-shot color data, so something that comes from a DSLR camera, or monochromatic data, if you're using a dedicated astronomy camera. With filters or narrowband imaging, we'll talk about how to actually put those data sets together. We go over linear image enhancements and describing what linearity in terms of an astrophotograph means. Deconvolution is a really big trick that tends to trip people up. So we go into that in detail, and then linear noise reduction techniques and why the benefit of doing a linear noise reduction as opposed to a nonlinear noise reduction technique is the best idea. How to best stretch your data to achieve the best dynamic range, the best color fidelity of your data set. And then obviously what everyone kind of thinks of as the Photoshop portion of it, the last nonlinear adjustments where you're adjusting sharpness, contrast, color, and noise. That's what most people typically do within Photoshop. But as you can see, this program is an all-in-one from beginning to end, to where you can do everything you need to do with creating an astrophotograph within this program. So here are some examples of images that I've personally processed via PixInsight, and a couple of them are obtained via Kitt. But first one is the Ghoul Nebula. It's part of the Witch's Head Nebula in Orion. This is one of the images that I got as a Halloween APOD, which was really cool. This one is NGC 1316. That is two spiral galaxies that are going through a crazy interaction. We can see these huge tidal tails. And so, as I mentioned, stretching an image to properly bring out these huge tidal interactions that are there within your data without blowing out the cores of the galaxies and the stars is something that we go over, something that really challenges a lot of individuals. So I saw Rob pop on.
Yes, I thought I'd ask a question here about these pictures, because I'm curious, how much exposure time does it take for images like this? So how many different images could you produce during a night of Solario imaging? Of course, knowing that probably won't get quite as many during the summer because shorter nights. You might get a few more during the winter with longer nights. But how long does it take to do this? So how many would you be expecting in an evening?
Sure. So these ones would probably dedicate an entire evening to. So that's a great question. On several of these images, well, okay. The first two images, these are about 17 hours worth of data. So you might actually need 2 full nights to get enough data for these kind of in-depth images. This is a very, very faint dusty nebula. And then my goal for capturing this target was to bring out the intense tidal tails that exist around these two galaxies. So again, about 17 images. However, if you wanted to go for, let's say, a little bit of a brighter target, like a beautiful Trifid nebula M20, this was about 4 hours of data to really bring out all the background hydrogen alpha that's in there, as well as the detail on the dust lanes in the core. So you could get 1 to 2 of these images a night, depending on how deep you want to go. And that's one of the great things about Solario is you get to choose if you really want to focus a ton of time on just one particular target that you just can't ever really get very well from your location, especially like the dusty targets that are really challenging, like the Iris Nebula, for example. You could, sink an entire night into these. We've actually had a couple of individuals say, hey, can I get 5 nights in a row on Solario? And the great thing is, because we just started this program, you definitely could. Or you can get it over multiple months potentially too. It just depends on what you want to do. And then finally, if there happens to be another comet that comes by, this is Comet Leonard. Funny enough, I actually work with the guy's wife at my hospital who discovered this comet, and he works at Mount Lemmon Sky Center. But if you have a transient object come by and it's not in the location that you can get, or it's cloudy, you can hop on to Solario, just use a telescope for a night. This is actually 4 minutes total of data for this particular comet image. So yeah, really the sky's the limit with this platform, and you can really do what you want to do with it, which is what's really cool about it. All right, and so, like I said, the rental opportunities are now open. The next open Solario session is tonight. Scope is actually not being rented out this evening, so I'm gonna hop on it right after this call and get some more data on some targets that I've been working on. However, we have within the Eventbrite platform, we have the next 2 months fully open and ready to be rented out. There's only one night that's been booked in June so far as of this morning when we open it all up. Our next workshop is going to be on May 28th. So at the end of the month, we've got about 3 weeks left. We've already got about 5 to 6 people signed up for that one. We do limit it to 16, just so that our Zoom platform is not overloaded and we can have real-time conversations with members of the audience. However, we had some great success with the last one in April. That was our first one and the first time we tried it. And so I think this will be an ongoing monthly workshop as long as the demand is there, and it seems to be. So like Jamika had asked, all of this information is on www.visitkittpeak.org. I will say that when you first get to the Visitor Center webpage, there's a splash page that just tells members of the public that the mountaintop is closed to visitors. However, we have these really great remote opportunities. Click this link. So just click on the link and it'll go to our Eventbrite page and registration for both of these events.
Okay, Casey, we have a question from our YouTube audience.
Okay.
This is from Liz Flemings of the Memphis Stargazers. And she asks, can we access your collection of images?
Yes, definitely can. On the Visit Kitt Peak website, we do have a link to our images that we've obtained from our overnight telescope program. Solario is still kind of new, and we're going to be updating our database with that. My personal images can be found on www.good-astronomy.com or on social media at Good Astronomy. So yeah, I'm more than happy to provide images, especially for any of the astronomy clubs out there. If you'd like to use them in a presentation or anything like that, just drop me a line and let me know.
Fantastic. I will add that link. I'll drop that link into the chat. Oh, these are beautiful, Casey. Wow. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for the question, Liz.
All right. And with that, that actually brings me to the end of my presentation. So if there's any other questions out there, I'd love to have them. Yeah.
Okay, well that's actually fantastic, Casey. A lot of great images there. So I don't see anything else in the Facebook chat right now for questions, but I have been dropping the links in the Facebook chat. Is there anything else in YouTube at this point, Jamika?
Nothing else in YouTube right now. I did just drop the link to your Good Astronomy site. That wow, just so beautiful. But I do have a question. Now, me myself, I guess this is still considered astrophotography. You know, using a camera, a CCD camera. That we would plug in instead of, some people actually use DSLRs, really nice ones. But I think this would all be considered astrophotography. So for those of us who have the CCD cameras, would your workshop also be appropriate in helping us use that equipment?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So workflows within PixInsight are not significantly different depending on what the source is, whether it's a DSLR, a monochromatic CCD, or a one-shot color CCD or a CMOS chip, which is more popular in the amateur market right now. It doesn't differentiate. The only difference between the two is if you have a color image from a color CCD or a DSLR camera, there's going to be just one or two additional steps that are different than a monochrome processing, but very, very early on, you're processing the data the same from basically the combination on out. And so it can be applicable to any of those. And we go over both options within the workshop on how to deal with both of those different types of equipment.
Great. Oh, that's great. That's great, Casey. And then for those of us who may be having issues with their cameras, because I have definitely have, and I'm going to switch to a different one. Do you do, if there's time and not enough people that we can have the time to have individualized questions like that, is that something that you can address in the workshop, troubleshooting individual issues with cameras?
Definitely. So the last workshop, we had a couple of attendees. It was, I think, 5. And due to the smaller size, we actually ended about an hour and a half early. And I'm more than happy to stay on and help individuals out. And so we were talking about planning images. Like one of the individuals was from Florida, and he was going to take a trip out to Texas and wanted to know, from an acquisition standpoint, what my suggestion would be and what equipment to use on his astrophotography trip. Another gentleman was asking some very, very similar questions. Hey, I have these two pieces of equipment that aren't working. And, I'm addicted enough that I know a lot in terms of all the different astro gear that's out there. And I've also helped out a lot of individuals with different vendor brands and everything else. And so they were able to share their screen, and I was able to figure out that it was a driver that he was missing to get his camera working. So definitely, if there's time within the workshop, we can do that. Even if there's not, I'm more than happy to stay on afterwards or hook up with you later to help you get going, because this is a great hobby to be involved with, and it's a great way to explore the skies. So I want everyone to be able to enjoy it.
Great. I have two quick questions from the Facebook chat.
Sure.
Same vein here. Just wondering if you had a Facebook page or a Twitter account.
I do. Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram are all just at Good Astronomy.
good dash astronomy or Good Astronomy?
Just Good Astronomy. It's only the website that has
one word.
Yeah. So luckily, I have a good last name for marketing purposes.
Yeah. Oh, yep. And I found your Facebook page, so I'll put that in the chat for the person who asked the question. And I'll try and find the Twitter page. Hopefully, you have Twitter as well?
Yep. Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
Okay, so there's Facebook, and we'll go to Twitter and get that one. So
I also am dropping your links in the YouTube chat as well.
Thank you. Yeah, you'll see that I actually shared, today's May the 4th, obviously. We're all Star Wars fans, probably, since we're involved in astronomy. So I'm actually sharing an image of Mimas, since it looks just like the Death Star. And it's in the moons of Saturn.
But I don't think you took that picture of Mimas that shows the Death Star.
I did put a disclaimer in there that was not myself. I wish I took that picture, but
Yes, I actually just took pictures of the Mercury and Pleiades last night here when I'm on vacation in Florida. So I did some photography last night. So that's probably a little bit wider field of view than you have in that camera on the Solario.
Very true, but that's why DSLRs are super handy to have. Just walk outside with a a telephoto lens and just go at it.
That 200 millimeters framed it really nice. The 200 millimeter lens framed them very nicely last night. So
not bad.
Any other questions, Jamika? I don't see anything else, and I'll just do one more check at Facebook here.
No more questions from our YouTube audience, but I do have a question myself. So what would you recommend? Two things. Recommend as a beginning DSLR camera for those who want to get into astrophotography, and do you have an entry-level CCD camera that you could recommend?
Yeah, definitely. So an entry-level DSLR, in my classes, I try to encourage everyone to use what they have. You get like Rob's picture right behind him, you can get with just a simple DSLR and a 14 millimeter lens on a tripod in 30 seconds.
And that was a Canon 6D, I believe, with a 14 millimeter lens in about 30 seconds. So
Looks right about, yep.
you're pretty much spot on with what you just said.
Nice.
Like I said, a lot of people have some sort of DSLR. I started out with a Canon T3 because my sister had a spare one and she was upgrading. If I were to go out today and get one, and I was just new to the hobby and knew I was going to love it, I really like the new mirrorless Canons. And I would definitely recommend staying within the Canon brand for astrophotography, because Canon actually released their digic coding much sooner than Nikon did. And so a lot of the astrophotography programs, if you later want to put that DSLR onto telescope and control everything all at once, there's many more driver support and vendor support for Canons than there are Nikon or Olympus or Sony. Not to say you couldn't do it with any of the other brands, but Canon was kind of the first out the gate. And so that's why a lot of people have them. The Canon 6D, if you can find one, is like one of the best for nighttime shooting because it has large pixels. It's very sensitive at night. And as you can see from Rob's beautiful picture, I mean, that's literally a non-modified Canon 6D, I'm guessing, just right off the shelf with a 14 millimeter lens on a tripod.
Correct. That's the 14 millimeter f1.8 lens, so it's a very fast lens, but yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, they have the 14 millimeter Rokinon lenses that you can get off of Amazon for like $300. So, you know, you can be out shooting for less than $1,000 if you find a decent one used on eBay. For CCD cameras, if you are starting out on a color, you want to use a one-shot color, you don't want to worry about filters, I would recommend either the ZWO or the QHY variant. They're both manufacturers. I would recommend the 533 color camera. The 533 is a specific chip type that is 9 megapixels, and it's based off of Sony's newest CMOS sensors that offer full 14-bit well depth and behave more like CCDs, where there's not any like amp glow or weirdness going on with the sensors like the first round of CMOS sensors that came out. It's the most user-friendly, and it's got a 90% quantum efficiency, which means it captures 90% of the photons that actually hit them, because it's a back illuminated CMOS sensor. So it's very, very sensitive. It's very easy to put on a telescope and get really beautiful pictures. And then they're actually coming out with a monochromatic version of that next month from both manufacturers. So my recommendation would still be the same, just the monochromatic version. And they're both less than $1,000 too, which is incredible, because when I started in the hobby, like, you had to get a CCD, and the cheapest CCD you could find was like $4,000. So it's been a lot more affordable as the CMOS implementation into the amateur astrophotography market. It's basically created a lot more options for individuals that want to just get started in the hobby, which is fantastic.
That is exactly the kind of detail I was looking for. Now, what about using your cell phone? Is there something you can share for those people who may not have a DSLR, may not have a CCD camera, but they are really into this and want to get started with what they have right now, which may just be their phone? What can they do with that?
Sure. So it's amazing what the modern cell phones can do. And actually the CMOS sensors that I was talking about are the same thing that's in everyone's phones right now. So the newest models of, I think it's the Samsung Galaxy phone. I'm an iPhone guy, but on the Samsung Galaxies, they actually have like an astrophotography mode built into the camera. So you can, you know, like portrait mode, you can swipe over to like nighttime mode or astronomy mode. And all it does is allows you to hold the shutter open for a couple of seconds. And you'd be amazed at what people are doing. You know, they're getting Milky Way shots, they're getting aurora shots. It's just crazy what people are doing, just holding their phone up outside. You know, there's several different manufacturers that build like little adapters to get onto telescopes to fit your iPhone onto a telescope. And that's actually how I got started in the hobby. I had a Celestron C8, and I made the mistake of putting my iPhone up to the eyepiece and taking a picture of the moon. And I was just hooked after that. So I literally got started with a cell phone as well. So it's definitely possible. Just put it up to the eyepiece. In fact, I can't tell you how many visitors during our nighttime programs at Kitt Peak want to do just that. They could walk up and put their phone on top of the eyepiece, take a picture of the moon or whatever we happen to be looking at. So yeah, definitely. That's why I tell everyone, just get out there, get to a dark sky, experience it, see the beauty of a dark sky, and then try to take a picture, and you'll be hooked, and you won't have any money after that.
Yeah, well, the one thing I'd recommend is going to Amazon and getting like the less than $10 adapter to hold your cell phone on a tripod, because that way you can hold the phone steady and do longer exposures.
Yeah. And, so basically, there's apps for the iPhone now where you can hold the shutter open. So you basically just need to put it on a tripod and then hold the shutter open for like 10 or 15 seconds. You'll be amazed at what you can get.
Yeah. I have a Google Pixel 6 Pro, and it does pretty good at night. Although I haven't got it, I haven't done Milky Way yet, because the Milky Way hadn't been up yet at this time since I got it. So, but looking forward to it
until 3 o'clock in the morning, Rob.
I probably will soon. I have to starting to get. I'll probably be on Kitt Peak later this month and be able to do it. So
there you go.
So you said, Casey, that there is an app for the iPhone that allows the shutter to stay open longer. Is that just in the App Store? They can just put that in.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure what the actual app is, but it's like a camera control app. It's not built for astrophotography, but if it allows you to just hold the shutter open, that's all you really need it to do. The shutter open, you can take an astrophotograph.
Well, I think
Rob, you said there was an adapter, the holder, the Amazon. Do you know the name of that? Is it just like a cell phone adapter holder?
Just type in cell phone tripod adapter on Amazon. There's lots of them on there. There's not just one, but there's lots of them. There's many of them are under $10. I have one that I got for like $8, which is really, does portrait landscape mode, and you can turn it and it just holds your cell phone and does what's advertised for $8. So,
I saw someone do it with the selfie stick once, because it has the button where you can control the shutter on it. So he just like set it on like a tree, basically. That was his tripod, held the shutter on a selfie stick and took an astrophotograph that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy what you can do now.
Yeah.
It really seems that this getting into astrophotography seems really approachable now, just kind of with whatever we would have around, starting with a cell phone. That is so, and this is one of the things that I love about astronomy, is that no matter your level of education, background, interest, exposure to it at all, you really can start on your own, just using your eyes and what's around. Casey, thank you so much for all of those details. And if anyone else in our last few minutes have questions or comments for today's guest, Casey, please go ahead and drop those comments and questions in the chat, and I will make sure to convey those.
Yeah, like you said, I love how approachable this hobby is for everyone, and astronomy is in general. I mean, when I do a tour of a Kitt Peak, I tell everyone I'm an accountant. I never took an astronomy class, and I work at the National Observatory now for fun. So tells you what you can do if you just have a passion for it.
Absolutely.
Well, the dirty secret is I never took a formal astronomy class either, but learned by doing it. Working at the observatory as an undergrad, and then also just ended up did particle physics in grad school, and ended up at a Fermilab fellowship in the astrophysics department. So just sort of wherever you are, you learn what you need to know. So
exactly, I did none of that, but I love talking about it.
Oh yeah, so do I.
Who doesn't like talking about space?
Absolutely. So in the YouTube chat, for everyone who is in our YouTube audience, the links to connect with Casey on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter are there. The links to the Eventbrite sign up registration for this experience, this remote astrophotography experience, is also in the chat. And we have plenty of links to other things that Casey mentioned, and of course to the NOIRLab Stories blog, excuse me, that Rob mentioned earlier about NEWIT. So please feel free to check those out. And Rob, back to you for our last 9 minutes here.
Okay, well, we might just wrap up a few minutes early, so I think we are just about done here. So I'd like to thank Casey for his presentation, because that was absolutely fantastic, and a really fun conversation about astrophotography here, and I look forward to seeing you on the mountain sometime in the not too distant future, and
Yeah,
seeing playing with Solario in person. I mean, I've looked through the solar telescope at Solario, which you didn't talk about, because there's actually a solar facility there as well.
that's very true. It's just not available to everyone right now, but hopefully very, very soon the public will be looking through those telescopes at the beautiful sun and what's going on right now.
Okay. I was going to that's another question. Is there any plans to do the photography with solar telescopes or cameras up there?
So during our normal astrophotography workshops, we do exactly that. I bring a camera specifically for solar astrophotography. In the intro class, we go over specifically solar astrophotography as well. So we haven't thought about doing it remotely, but not a bad suggestion. If there's interest, I'm sure we would be able to do it.
Yeah, I'm sure there would be. I played with my ZWO 1600 in solar astrophotograaphy a little bit with an H alpha scope, but I'm
Yeah,
sure
exactly.
I have a lot to learn. Put it that way, I have a lot to learn about how to process the images. But,
Come to the workshop
images
next
were
time.
the images were fantastic, though, Rob. I got to do some of this with Rob and our colleague, also Juan Seguel down in Chile. They were both doing some things with the sun, some solar imaging, and it was amazing, Rob. So okay, maybe you still have some things to learn, but it was fantastic. And I'm really glad you asked that, because so many people have never actually seen the sun through a telescope and seeing all the beautiful characteristics. Let me just say, I won't give away too much, all the beautiful characteristics that can be seen when the sun is in its active phase, which it is right now.
Yeah.
one time we had the characteristic of doing this was during a live presentation with Chile, so I was doing live stream to Chile. And we had the feature of an A10 flying across the face of the sun.
Oh, wow.
It just happened. It happened to be an A10 go across the sun. Of course, with the telescope, it looked like a nice, good-sized plane covering the sun for a second as it went across. So that's just random luck from the luck of the draw in Tucson with our local military base.
You couldn't do that if you planned it.
I wasn't imaging at the time. I was actually live streaming the image. So fortunately, I was able to go back to YouTube and do a screen capture of it, but not quite the same as having the full resolution image.
True.
Still fun little accident, fun little happy accident. So, okay, well, I think we'll be wrapping up here. But before we do, Jamika, do you have anything? Do you have an upcoming Live from NOIRLab at Gemini to tell us about?
Just that you can look forward to the next month live from NOIRLab, of course, from Hawaii. It'll be the first Wednesday of the month. Check back on our YouTube channel to see what the topic is and who our guest will be.
Okay. Well, then, thank you very much, Casey, and thank you, Jamika, for joining us today. And I'm gonna gavel this to a close, and we'll see you next month on Live from NOIRLab.
All right. Thank you, guys.